My name is Katie, and I am going to be talking to you today about books for plague times. Coronavirus, am I right? Everyone's getting quarantined. They're saying it's only a matter of time. So let's talk about books you can read while you're in quarantine. Plague books. This week I am talking about the classic Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Excellent book, set in a plague time. What could be better? So let's talk a little bit first about what the hell is cholera. If you live in a first world country, especially in Europe or North America, you're probably lucky enough to have never really encountered this disease, which is good because cholera is gross. It is really yucky. It can cause death within 7 hours. And how does it work? So cholera starts from some kind of tainted water supply, but it's a terrible bacteria. It can live in salt water. It can live outside the human body. It's super duper contagious. And when you get cholera, you get diarrhea. You get super gross, super liquidy poop coming out your body. And that poop is full of bacteria, right? So that poop gets everywhere. Maybe it retains the water supply. Maybe it just fecal matter drifts into your house. We all know poop is gross anyway, but it gets extra gross when you have cholera. Again, because it's so contagious, right? It's a total plague. I think the word plague is an excellent description of how cholera works. And like I said, cholera has been basically eradicated in Europe and North America for a while, not a very long time, but long enough. And how you treat cholera is pretty simple. When you get cholera, you tend to die from dehydration. So treatment is just IV fluids, some antibacterial-ish, and basically pump you full of water so you can't poop all your water out until the bacteria is gone from your body. Despite this simple treatment, cholera is still a major issue in countries around the world, specifically countries like India, Bangladesh, countries that don't always have access to clean drinking water, and things like that. And cholera is responsible for at least 6 pandemics since the 1800s, which I think if cholera and coronavirus got in a fight, cholera might win. When is the time of cholera is probably the next question we should ask. There were actually 7 cholera pandemics throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The last one was as recent as the 60s in India. And again, like I said, this is not an eradicated disease. It's not like, oh, the time of cholera has long since passed. It has just probably passed for you accessing YouTube in your first world country. So the first cholera pandemic started in 1817, eventually killed 100,000 people on the island of Java in Indonesia. It started in India and it just spread slowly. All these ships, trade routes, railroads, that's how it spread. Second one, 1829, started in Europe. Then some dummy, much like people with the coronavirus, hopped on a ship from Britain to the US and spread it over here. And it made it down into Latin America by 1833. That's important because Love in the Time of Cholera is set in Latin America, specifically Colombia. So this is a region of the world that has been dealing with cholera since 1833 by everyone's best guess. There's a few more, right? A few more cholera pandemics. There in 1846, 1 million people were killed in Russia thanks to cholera. 52,000 people died in England. And this is actually the cholera epidemic that killed James Polk, one of our presidents. So I think he was the 11th president. Sad days. And everywhere they had to expand cemeteries. That's how kind of massive and epic that is. And cemetery expansion is mentioned briefly in this book. During the third cholera epidemic, a man called, get this, his name was John Snow.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
He is the one that discovered that cholera was being caused by crappy water. And so after that, slowly but surely, the Western world began to manage cholera until it became less of an issue than it still was and still is in developing countries, right? So the fourth one was in 1863. That is when everyone is taking action in terms of drinking water, really helped out. The fifth one, 1881, was the last major European outbreak. And then in 1899, there was a huge one. Cholera broke out 27 times during the Hajj in Mecca from the 19th century to 1930, which is a big deal. But this is also when the disease becomes associated with outsiders, especially in America and Europe, right? So again, like I said, Europe has already taken steps to address water supplies, everything like that. So the people that wind up with cholera, much like today, are outsiders, right? They're immigrants. They're people who are poor, people who don't have access to clean drinking water. So it becomes kind of a stigmatized disease. And Love in the Time of Cholera is probably specifically talking about one of these two plagues, right? So it's set in the late 19th, early 20th century. And then, like I said again, there was a final plague in 1961. Oh, okay. Okay, so basic premise is two very young people fall in love. She is 14, he is maybe 19 or 20. They promise, they send each other these dishy love notes. They've got this secret love affair going on. He is just enamored. He can't eat, he can't sleep, he's having fever dreams. He loves her so much, and she slowly comes around and starts feeling the same way. Well, of course, as always happens in love stories, her dad finds out and is like, oh, hell no. So he forces her name is Fermina, he forces her off on this long, arduous journey through the jungle, where she pines and wastes away and is just generally heartbroken and stricken. And eventually she comes back and she encounters this guy is kind of following her, a little creepy, but he's loved her. He's written her all these love notes. They've promised each other that they'll get married. And finally they see each other in person for the first time, and he is like, I love you so much. And she is like, oh, this was better in my imagination. So she basically bye bitches him.
Bye, bitch.
And that is how their love story starts. Years unfold, decades unfold. They both have amorous adventures of many kinds. There is a bit of an inappropriate love scene between a 14-year-old and a very old man. There's a lot of other dishy, sensual, sexy scenes in this book. But again, it's about love. It's an epic love story. And so here is when you should read it, right? Like I mentioned, it's plague times. I think this is a fantastic book for if you are quarantined or self-quarantined. It is absorbing. It will take you a while to read. It really is good for reading right before bed, because then you can close your eyes and imagine all the magical things that happen in it. So that's good. I also think this is a good book if you have any kind of love story in your life, right? So did your heart just get broken? This is a great book. If you're married, this is a great book. There's actually a lot of wit and wisdom and insight into being married throughout. I think if you've ever loved somebody and had them not love you in return, excellent book. If you've just thought a little bit about love, like all of us, it's a pretty good book. Ultimately, it should be required reading. So I just got into work and I was having some thoughts about love in the time of cholera that I think we need to address. The first is kind of scholarship in and about the book, right? So here's what I did is I looked it up on a bunch of academic databases, just typed in the book title. It has inspired a plethora of shittily named papers, right? So let me look at some of these for you guys, just so you know. There's Judicial Review in the Time of Cholera, Escape from the Time of Cholera, Praxis in the Time of Empire, Teaching in the Time of Testing, Jazz in the Time of Globalization. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? Can't fault him, can't blame him. Garcia Marquez is a genius. Imitation is the best form of flattery, but it was a little, it took me aback. The second thing I kind of wanted to talk about is I gave a lot of context about cholera, because I'm fascinated by pandemics and plagues, but it made me start thinking about why this book specifically is set in the time of cholera. And I have some suppositions, but if you disagree or want to add on or anything, please comment and let me know. Right, so my number one supposition has to do with this preoccupation that Garcia Marquez seems to have for nostalgia, but also this nostalgia of moving out of the 19th century and into the 20th, right? So I don't know how many of you have also read 100 Years of Solitude, but it's very much kind of preoccupied with this movement away from this nostalgic kind of folksy, I don't know if it's more innocent past, into a more implicated present, right? Into modernization, this loss of something kind of ephemeral. And I'm wondering if by setting this book in the time of cholera, Garcia is trying in some way to like taint our idea of the past, or subvert it, or have us question it. I'm not sure. I it fits thematically with like some ideas in the story that I don't want to give away because I don't want to ruin the book for you. So anyway, there's some other questions too. These are probably pretty good book club questions, right? Like questions that are just as simple as like, what would you do if your spouse died and some guy who promised to love you in high school showed up after his funeral and said, hey, I still love you? Who does that? Or conversely, do you believe in this idea of a lifetime full of love, right? Like that this consuming kind of consumptive, passionate love only really exists for one person, or only can, over the scope of your lifetime. So let me know. What do you think? Thoughts, feelings, emotions, reactions, comment, and hopefully we can do this again.